So for me, the familiarity of this story conjures up images of coloring books and silly songs and that sort of thing. But once you get past that, and you can set aside all the silliness that typically accompanies this story, this has to be one of the most jaw-dropping instances of God's one-way love for sinners in the entire Bible. Because what we have in this story, this familiar story of Jesus and Zacchaeus, what we have in this story is a window not only into Jesus' love for sinners, but the fruit that Jesus' love for sinners can bear in a person's life. Not to mention the resistance that Jesus' love for sinners gets from those who oftentimes witness the inequitable injustice of God's love for train wrecks like you and me. Now, let me give you just a little bit of context here. Zacchaeus was essentially the Bernie Madoff of Jericho, okay? He really, really was. In fact, it specifies here that he was a chief tax collector and he was rich. Now, if you read the Gospels at all, you know that tax collectors were not people who were popular. Okay, it reminds me, and I'm reminded of it this morning because my mom, who was here last week for Gabe's graduation, begged me to tell her this story again. And I was reminded of it, and I told it at my dad's funeral. I don't know if any of you have heard me tell this story before, but it's the story of the two brothers. They were crooks, they were thieves, they lived in a small village, and they ripped everybody off. Basically, they had a business where they ripped everybody off in the village. And one day, one of the brothers drops dead, literally drops dead. So the living brother goes to the pastor of the small little church in that village, and he says, listen, would you please eulogize my deceased brother? Would you perform the funeral ceremony? And the pastor says, there's no way. I mean, I couldn't think of one good thing to say about the guy. Everybody in this village knows that you guys are crooks. You've ripped off everybody in the village. And the living brother said, listen, it'll be worth your while. Trust me. I'll pay you well if you just do my brother's funeral. And so the pastor said, well, you know, any man has his price. So he agreed to do it. Well, as the living brother was walking out, he said, one condition. Somewhere in the eulogy, you can put it wherever you want, I need you to refer to my deceased brother as a saint. And so the pastor was like, fine, whatever, you paid me a lot of money, I'll do what you ask. So the day of the funeral comes, the entire village gathers because everyone wanted to make sure that the guy who died was really dead. It was more of a celebration than anything else. And they couldn't wait to see what this pastor had to say about this guy. I mean, they were just dying to find out what in the world is this guy going to have to say, this pastor have to say about this guy. And so the pastor stands up and he says, everybody knows the character of the man who lies here in this coffin. He was a crook. He was a cheat. He ripped off everybody in this room. But compared to his brother, he was a saint. Okay? Now, for whatever reason, my mom loves that story, and every time she comes to town, she's like, tell me the story of the brother and the saint again. I'm like, you know. Anyway, she made me tell that story at Gabe's graduation party because she wanted to then get up after me and say, Gabe, honey, compared to your father, you're a saint, which she did, okay? Well, you know, compared to Zacchaeus, every other tax collector was a saint. I mean, he was a chief tax collector, and he was rich, okay? The Bernie Madoff of Jericho. And as the chief tax collector, the Jews would have despised him because he collected taxes for Rome. Yet as a Jew, he would have also been despised by his Roman employers, okay? So he got it from both sides. Even the other tax collectors would have hated him because he likely cheated them too, skimming funds off the top of their own ill-gotten gains and cash. And then you add to that mix the fact that he clearly had a Napoleon complex, okay? I mean, the Bible's very clear that he was small in stature, You know, he had sort of small man's syndrome. And you put all that together and you have a picture of a loathsome loan shark who used his authority to extort his countrymen for his own personal gain while collecting money for the enemy, okay, the Roman Empire. So, like Bernie Madoff, his reputation, Zacchaeus' reputation, would have been well-founded. In other words, it was understandable that this guy was not well-liked. Nobody liked Zacchaeus, and there was good reason why nobody liked Zacchaeus. Just like the two brothers, he ripped off everybody in the village, okay? And I'm certain that had he dropped dead, the entire village would have gathered for his funeral as well to celebrate his death, okay? He was remarkably unpopular. All of this makes Jesus' actions here even more shocking, okay? The fact that he was most likely the most hated man in the village, as the Gospels make pretty plain regarding the reputation of tax collectors, not to mention chief tax collectors. And when it says he was rich, well, how did he get his money? He literally ripped everybody off. He was a thief. And so all of that makes Jesus' actions here even more shocking, more surprising. So I want to look just briefly at two things. Verses 1 through 7 identify and articulate Jesus' extension of undeserved grace. And then verses 8 through 10 spell out Zacchaeus' expression of unforced obedience. Both of these things are really, really important, and they both go hand in hand. So first, Jesus' extension of undeserved grace. Notice here, Jesus singles Zacchaeus out. Now, there are tons of people, okay? The way this passage makes it sound is that most everybody in the village came out to see Jesus. He had earned a reputation as one who not only preached with authority, but one who could raise the dead and heal the sick and forgive sins and all of that stuff. And so along the countryside, Jesus had become quite famous. And so when word got out that Jesus was making his way through the town, most likely the whole town came out to see who he was and all of that stuff. And so there's this mob of people, and Jesus singles Zacchaeus out despite the fact that Zacchaeus hasn't said or done anything to attract his attention. In other words, Zacchaeus doesn't climb up the tree and say, "Hey, Jesus, up here, up here, up here, up here, up here." He doesn't do anything. He doesn't try to approach Jesus. He simply does what he would have done for any passing sideshow. He climbs a tree so he could catch a glimpse of what was going on. Okay, that's what he did. He went down, heard the ruckus that was taking place, went down, couldn't see over the crowd, climbed a tree just so he could get a sense of what was going on. ESPN has these remarkable documentaries called 30 for 30. I don't know if you've ever seen them. Whether you're a sports fan or not, these are remarkable stories. And Kim and I watched one the other night. It was the day. It was amazing. It was a documentary on the day that O.J. Simpson was being chased in his friend Al Cowling's white Bronco. If you remember, it was June, I think, 17th, 1994. I remember that because it was about 3 weeks before my wedding. On that same day, the Knicks and the Rockets were playing Game 5 of the NBA Finals. Arnold Palmer was playing his last round of golf ever. One of the hockey teams, I don't even know anything about hockey, they're playing hockey, okay? Are there hockey fans here this morning? Yeah, good. There's 4 of you. That's good. We live in South Florida, okay? Anyway, hockey was being played. That sport that's on the ice with ice skates. Some native Floridians are like, "What's that? What's hockey? What's ice?" Anyway, all of this was going on the same day. And one of the things that was so amazing about this event. It really revolved around this whole chase, how all of Los Angeles was tuned in to what was going on with the whole O.J. Simpson thing. In fact, the amount of people watching on television was just stunning. But one of the things that gripped us or shocked us as we were watching this documentary was how many people came out lining LA highways, on bridges. The masses of people gathered outside O.J. Simpson's house, hoping that he would come back and they would just catch a glimpse of him. I mean, this was massive, okay? Well, on a smaller scale, because they didn't have television back then, Jesus is making his way, and the crowd just, lining the streets, and everybody comes out to see what this is all about, who this man is. And of every single person gathered there that day, Jesus singles out Zacchaeus. Okay, he points him out, the most hated guy in the city. He points him out, and there's no gesture on Zacchaeus' part of repentance, no prayers, no words, nothing. He doesn't call out to Jesus. He doesn't summon Jesus. He's just there. This is all Jesus' initiative, this conversation, this interaction. And notice, Jesus doesn't say, Zacchaeus, come down. I would like to go to your house. He doesn't say that. He says, in front of the crowd, not the most popular thing to do. He says, in front of the crowd, I must stay at your house. Come down from there. I must spend time with you. And in saying that, in approaching Zacchaeus, you have to understand how politically incorrect this is on Jesus' part. Okay, he goes to the most hated man in the city, and he initiates contact, he initiates conversation, and he doesn't say, hey, listen, come down, I want to meet you in the back alley and maybe we can grab a drink somewhere, okay? He doesn't say that. He says in front of the crowd, come down, I must stay at your house, okay? I must stay at your house. And in doing this, Jesus is making a statement about the centrality of his mission by inviting himself to Zacchaeus' house. This is what he's saying. To Zacchaeus, to all of us through the passage, and to everyone who was there that day, this is what I'm all about. This is who I am, and this is what I've come to do. Let there be no mistake whatsoever about my mission. My mission is clear. This right here, me coming, taking the initiative, approaching, inviting myself, pushing myself on sinners like this, hated, despised people like this. This is what I'm all about. We get a snapshot right here simply in Jesus' approach to this guy within context, that this is what Jesus is all about. This is a snapshot of who Jesus is and the mission that he came to accomplish. And we can safely assume, based on Zacchaeus' reaction here, that Zacchaeus would have been shocked that Jesus wanted to spend time with him. Just stunned, you know? You'd almost say, listen, I know what you're trying to do here, but for your reputation's sake, I wouldn't hang out with me. Okay. You can almost hear his reply. You want to come to my house? You want to associate with me? Are you sure you have the right guy? Do you know who I am? Notice verse 6. So he hurried, Zacchaeus hurried and came down and received him joyfully. In other words, Zacchaeus does not hesitate to respond to Jesus. That tells us something else about the power of Jesus' words. Jesus' invitation inspires. Okay, notice there's no hesitation here. There's not any, hey, listen, what? Jesus speaks, Zacchaeus responds, and he does so joyfully. The text doesn't say, but given his reputation, I think it's fair to ask the question, how long has it been since this guy had a guest in his house? Did he have family? Did he have friends? Apparently, by the crowd's reaction that we're going to look at in a minute, no one wanted to associate themselves with this guy. You know, I mean, how long had it been since he had someone come to his house, since he threw a dinner party for a guest, and more importantly, a guest of the stature of Jesus? Okay? I mean, was he lonely? Did he look to his money to satisfy his longings and to make him feel like a man? I mean, clearly, he did not have a whole lot of deep and wide relationships. Okay, he wasn't a guy that people wanted to be around. So how long had it been? He was stunned. You want to come to my house? I'm coming down. I'll be there. Well, as you can imagine, the people are absolutely scandalized. I mean, notice verse 7. And when they saw this, they saw Jesus' approach to Zacchaeus, their brief conversation, Zacchaeus coming down out of the tree, and then he and Jesus together walking away from the crowd towards Zacchaeus' house. Well, verse 7, when they saw it, they all grumbled. He has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. I mean, they clearly don't get it. I mean, this is what shocked them. This is what shocked them. Notice what they say here, okay? Number one, they make the mistake of assuming that God is for the clean and the competent. That's the first mistake they make, okay? They make the mistake of concluding that God is for those who are clean. God is for the good person and for the moral person and all of that stuff. And then, following that, they conclude that they themselves are the good, moral, competent people, and that Zacchaeus isn't. We're the good guys, he's the bad guy. God shouldn't hang out with bad guys. God is God, he's holy, he's righteous, he's good. He should be hanging out with the good guys, not the bad guys. We're the good guys, he's the bad guy. They were shocked, okay? They got Jesus and his whole mission upside down. Okay, they completely, absolutely misunderstood it. And they're just scandalized by all of this. I mean, of all the people Jesus decides to associate with, he chooses the most hated man in the city. I mean, Jesus' popularity and approval rating dropped significantly here. Okay, I mean, literally, he was probably being praised as he made his way through the city, and now he's being derided because of the action that he took. I mean, he chooses the most hated man in the city, and by shunning Zacchaeus, if you think about this, if his response would have been different, if Jesus would have come to town and said, Zacchaeus, get down here. And he stood up, he said, I want to have everybody's attention here for a minute. Everybody pay attention. Stop your singing for a second and just pay attention. Okay, see this guy? He'd probably been like this. See this guy? I know this guy has ripped off every single person in the village. I know that he has treated most of you like chumps, if not all of you. He has a lot of apologizing to do, so Zacchaeus, I want you right here, right now, to say sorry to everybody, and then the parade can continue. Zacchaeus? Okay. Had he done that, I mean, Jesus' popularity would have soared. Okay. I mean, it would have gone through the roof. If you would have called him down and called him out, called him to account in front of everybody, the very people that Zacchaeus had sinned against. Instead, he does just the opposite. So frustrating. It's frustrating for them. It's frustrating for us. We look back and say, geez, this crowd, they're so mean. These people are so self-righteous. Their spirit is so uncharitable. I mean, I can't believe these guys. But let's take this same idea into our own life. Okay? I mean, it is so painfully difficult for us to see someone who deserves judgment to get grace. So painful. I remember when the whole Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky thing happened, okay? And of course, it was a huge scandal. And my granddad was on the Today Show immediately following the whole scandal. And I forget who was interviewing him. Maybe it was Matt Lauer. I can't remember. Was Matt Lauer Today Show? I guess so. I don't know. But I remember them asking my grandfather, well, can you forgive him? And he said, just as plain as day, I want you to know that I pray for Mr. Clinton. I love Mr. Clinton. I forgive Mr. Clinton. And I understand the power of temptation and the frailty of human nature. Okay? Now, Christian leaders came out of the woodworks, saying, how could Billy Graham say such a thing? One famous Christian leader, who ironically had been on the receiving end of tremendous grace for a very public sin, said, Billy Graham is offering cheap grace. Said that on television. I'm thinking the irony of, anyway. But I mean, Christian leaders they were angry. They came out in droves. I mean, they would have loved to see the president, who they already didn't like because he was a Democrat, okay? They already didn't like him. So when he made this mistake, it was almost like, good, we got him, all right? And then the cry for him, now I understand, don't come up to me after the service and say, well, he was president, he had the office. I know, okay, the guy got impeached. I'm not defending Bill Clinton here. I'm simply saying the impulse in all of us when someone who deserves justice gets what we think is grace or love, or they're not being punished to the degree that they ought to be punished, is frustrating to us. So don't make the mistake of sitting there and going, well, this crowd is so mean. I mean, I can't believe it, Zacchaeus. I mean, after all, he's just a wee little man, you know? And I mean, Jesus is so nice, and these people are so mean. I mean, how could they? Listen, we would have been saying the same thing. We do say the same thing, okay? I mean, the hatred and the suspicion that had been focused on Zacchaeus by the crowd is now leveled at Jesus. This is what we commonly call guilt by association. Okay, I mean, the one minute the crowd is saying, Jesus is amazing. Next minute the crowd is mumbling, grumbling, go, who is this guy? I can't believe he hangs out with sinners. Should be hanging out with us. But sinners? Oh my gosh. So by associating, and this is a great preview of the cross, by associating with Zacchaeus, Jesus himself becomes the object of scorn and ridicule. Notice how the scorn and ridicule shifts from Zacchaeus to Jesus. Where else does the scorn and ridicule shift? Where is that great seismic shift in human history where punishment and wrath and ridicule are diverted away from us onto another? Well, like I said, it's easy for us to look back and disparage the crowd for their self-righteousness and their uncharitable spirit. But if we had been part of the mob that day, we would have reacted the same way. I mean, the way, and I've heard this before, it's amazing to me, okay? But the way that some people have made this story into something about us, Zacchaeus climbed his tree to see Jesus. Have you climbed yours? Okay? I've heard this story. I mean, I've heard this text used as a way to inspire teenagers to read their devotions every morning. Zacchaeus climbed his tree to see Jesus. You must climb your tree every morning to see Jesus by reading your Bible. Okay? Unbelievable. Now, it's important to read your Bible, and I recommend you read it every morning, especially if you're a teenager. For your parents' sake, read your Bible every morning, all right? But that's not what this story's about. This story isn't about Zacchaeus and him bravely climbing a tree to see Jesus. This is about Jesus going to a hated, despised social outcast, which is a snapshot of all of us, by the way, and saying, I want to be with you. I want to come be with you. At my initiative, at Jesus' initiative, I want to come to be with you. I want to associate myself with you. But the way that some have turned this story into something about us, he climbed his tree, you climb yours, proves that we are just as suspicious of grace as the crowd is or was. I mean, we want to pull something out of this story, but not that. You know, we want to pull some good moral lessons out of the story, but when we really get down to it, we don't want, this is kind of frustrating for us, okay? I said a number of weeks ago that Jesus would most likely not be admitted into membership of many churches in America. He just wouldn't. And the Apostle Paul, forget about it. I mean, no way. But I mean, this is how scandalous Jesus is. Okay, he's not safe, he's scandalous, and he's frustrating to be around because he turns everything that makes sense to us upside down and inside out. I mean, Jesus consciously disregards the accepted pecking order. Consciously. He does this on purpose, and he does it publicly. It's like he just wants to annoy us by doing what comes so unnatural to us. I mean, he upends our scales of deserving and merit and all of those things. I mean, we have a certain way, a certain conditional way of thinking about ourselves and God and other people and the way things ought to be, and Jesus just turns everything on its head. And oftentimes it's terribly frustrating. I mean, the crowd was, as we are, operating on the same transactional, conditional mentality and plane that the rest of the world does. Okay, so Christ gives undeserved grace to Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus responds by coming down immediately. The crowd responds by crying out, "Foul." But then notice, and this is my favorite part, okay, verses 8 through 10, notice how Jesus's extension of one-way love, of undeserved grace, notice how it inspires an expression of unforced obedience. Okay, notice. I mean, what happens next is even more shocking. Verse 8 of chapter 19, and Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, "Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold." There's nothing, it's not like there is a verse 7b that comes before verse 8 that's somehow missing from your Bible that says, Jesus pulled him in a corner and said, "Get your act together and give everything back that you stole." And then we get to verse 8 and it says, "And half of my goods I give to the poor." There is nothing. There is no preface here, okay? The preface that we have is Jesus publicly associating himself with Zacchaeus, calling him down in front of the crowd, and going off with him to eat back to Zacchaeus' house. That's the preface that we have. We don't have any preface of Jesus saying, "Zacchaeus, listen, I mean, you and I can be friends, but we've got to get a couple of things straight here, okay? I mean, let's just face it. You're a thief, man, okay? You have ripped everybody off, and in order for you and I to be tight, BFF, you're going to have to, I mean, seriously, you're going to have to go back and right all your wrongs, okay? Then, and only then, can we be close, be tight, you know? Jesus doesn't say that. Jesus loves him without condition. Come on down. I want to go to your house. Goes, and the very Zacchaeus' response to the promiscuity, to the egregious nature of God's grace is, I'm giving everything back. Half of everything I own will go to the poor, and if I've ripped anybody off, I'll pay them back 4 times as much as I took from them. I mean, the fruit of grace here is spontaneous generosity. I mean, Zacchaeus' joyful charity is not the preface to God's grace, it is the result of God's grace. The order here is so important. I mean, Jesus does not force, he doesn't coerce, he doesn't guilt Zacchaeus into giving back what he stole. He just loves him, and the natural fruit of this one-way love turns out to be far more extravagant than anything the law required. I mean, nowhere does the law require a person to give half of their goods to the poor. You can go back and read the Old Testament all you want. Nowhere in the Mosaic law do we find a requirement for a person to give half of their goods to the poor. Repaying someone that you had defrauded by 4 times the amount is far beyond the call of duty. In other words, Zacchaeus goes way beyond what the law requires, okay? I mean, Zacchaeus does more than the right thing, and he does it spontaneously, he does it cheerfully, and he does it abundantly. Now, the reason this is so important is because this really gets to the heart of the question, how does real change happen? Okay, we all care about that question. We care about it when it comes to our spouse. We care about it when it comes to our children. We care about it when it comes to ourselves. We care about it when it comes to other people, other family members, friends, coworkers, whatever. How does change actually happen? And this story is a perfect example of how change actually happens. I mean, there is a common misunderstanding that grace and change don't go hand in hand, that they're enemies. Too much love and too much grace produces serial killers. Okay, I mean, you give this stuff out and people become apathetic. You can't just talk about grace, grace, God's grace, grace. You can't just do that. I mean, you gotta really, if you really want people to change, you gotta scare them, you know? I mean, we've concluded that this whole thing is about behavioral modification, and love just doesn't possess the teeth to scare us into changing. That's what we conclude. Words, words, words. We speak, we lecture, we lay down the law, we give commands, all of those things, which in and of themselves are not bad, but when we conclude that those things are what affect real inside-out heart change, we're making a huge mistake. I mean, look at the story. It's as plain as day. What's going on here? I mean, what we see here and in our lives is that love alone inspires what the law demands. And love alone inspires us to do more than what the law demands. There's nothing bad about the law. There's nothing bad about the law at all. After all, God's law comes from God. It's perfect, it's holy, it's just, it's right. But the law, just giving people law in and of itself, does not have the power to enable people to keep it, much less go beyond it. What we see here is that love inspires what the law demands. The law prescribes good works, but only grace can produce them. Paul Zoll says, well, that one-way love is the essence of any lasting transformation that takes place in human experience. And you know that's true. I mean, think about it for a moment in your own life. Beneath your happiest moments and your closest relationships inevitably lies some instance of being loved in weakness or being loved in deserved judgment. Les Mis, greatest stories ever told. One of the greatest stories ever told. Remember Jean Valjean, who's, just gets released from prison, and Javert, who is the embodiment of law, looks at him before he's released and he says, I got my eyes on you. I've got my eyes on you. And because he's carrying papers that identify him as a criminal just released from prison, he can't find work, he can't find food, he can't even find a place to stay until some generous, loving priest invites him into his home to eat and sleep, and basically says, I'll take care of you. Well, the priest and his wife, the first night, the priest and his wife go to bed, and Jean Valjean wakes up and just steals, okay, from the priest. Steals. And his family. I mean, he takes full advantage of the generosity and the kindness that the priest has given. Well, he leaves in the middle of the night, and the police in that village arrest him. They arrest him, and they bring him back. Jean Valjean says, no, you don't understand. He gave me this stuff. So they say, oh, really? Well, we'll go check with the priest. So they bring him to the priest's home, and the priest looks at Jean Valjean, and he looks at the police, and he says, no, he's telling the truth. I did give him all of this stuff, but I'm a little frustrated that he forgot to take the silver candlesticks as well. And he gives Valjean the silver. Well, this act, if you've seen the movie or if you read the book, you know this act changes Jean Valjean forever. What the law demanded, only love could produce. I mean, he was on the receiving end of amazing grace, and it changed him forever. He became a humanitarian. He took care of people. He loved people because he himself had been showed amazing love. You see, gratitude, generosity, honesty, compassion, acts of mercy, self-sacrifice, all of these things spring unsummoned from a heart that knows it's been forgiven and loved. All of these things. And we see that here in the story. Same sort of thing. I mean, by definition, believe it or not, by definition, according to the Bible, good works can't be forced or coerced. If they are forced or coerced good works, they are by definition not good. They may look good on the outside, but they don't spring from a heart of gratitude. Good works, according to the Bible, are instinctive, they're reflexive, they're spontaneous. Works of love flow spontaneously from the one who hears and believes God's final I love you. A love that has no strings attached. That's what we see with Zacchaeus. I mean, doing becomes instinctive and spontaneous when our hearts become increasingly gripped by what's been done. So, we're all for doing here, okay, at Coral Ridge. But we want to ask the deeper question, what inspires doing? And what is the flavor of our doing? Is it guilt-driven doing? Is it fear-driven doing? You might as well just take those good works and throw them in the garbage because that's what they're worth. The only thing that the Bible can even remotely call good are works that flow spontaneously from a heart that knows it's been loved. Works of love which flow from a heart that knows it's loved. So the story ends in verse 10, and it ends so clearly. And Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham." And by salvation, he means, I've come to this house. Okay, the rescuer has arrived. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. I mean, I'm not sure how he could make it any plainer. By going to Zacchaeus, by identifying with him and being scorned in the process, Zacchaeus was saved. And the grace that Jesus showed Zacchaeus is only a preview of what awaited him at the cross. I mean, on the cross, I'll just leave you with this. On the cross, Jesus not only associated himself with tax collectors and prostitutes and addicts and preachers and teenagers. He not only associated himself with those kinds of people, people like you, people like me, but 2 Corinthians 5:21 even takes it a step further and says, "For our sake, God made him, Jesus, who knew no sin, to be sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God." One's beloved by God. So where there was only guilt by association, now and forevermore there is glory by association. as we trust in the one who came to do for us what we could never do for ourselves, as we bank on the one who loved us, unlovable people, more and better than anyone has or anyone can.